In 1970, this is a true story, Japanese playwright, poet and model Yukio Mishima held the leader of his country's army hostage, seeking to trigger a revolution of beauty, honor and tradition via the guiding hand of Tatenokai, the so-called Shield Society, a cult or private army that he had founded. Gay but closeted, an unsatisfied dreamer, a herald of beauty. He was also a suicide. He committed seppuku upon realizing that his revolution was a failure. Mishima was a complex man, so it's only fitting that Paul Schrader's 1985 portrait of him, co-signed by Mishima's estate, takes complexity as its watchword, its guiding principle. This is a biopic, sort of, loosely considered. But we've not really seen a biopic like this before, not quite. So, to bring in 2021 and to discuss this odd, fitful autobiography is, as ever, Ralph Pritchard.
Hey.
Ralph, did Mishima make a man out of you?
Did it make a man out of me? I mean, I do find him quite exciting as a figure, as a historical figure. I mean, to say he was gay is like libelous because his wife vehemently claims that he wasn't.
Well, I encourage a good libel case is good for the PR, you know. So,
but also complicated because he had a certain like a sort of trad romantic attitude towards women that he expresses in his novels, alongside this deep carnal lust for a strong man, which I think goes quite well with his fascist tendencies.
Yeah.
He's totally incompatible with our current cancel culture approach to public figures, where we try and figure out whether someone's good or bad. He, undeniably had a powerful sense for beauty, and that sense of beauty also had horrible political implications. I think, especially, I mean, it's funny in a way because he's quite anti-neoliberal. He's very, in some ways,
anti-capitalist was
the horseshoe thing, right? Like, he was so anti-neoliberal. He was kind of, but his anti-neoliberalism was like the beauty of the Japanese empire and this sort of ornateness that was being corroded by people buying loads of stuff. I found his work very sexy, even though I'm not into guys.
You're talking about Mishima as a man, as a man,
yeah. The film itself, what can we say about the film? I mean, it's beautiful. It's very composed. The structure is extremely. I've never really seen a film with such a huge budget behind it and such a staged and constructed atmosphere.
It's deeply compositional, and there's elements of it which reminded me. We can get back to Mishima in a minute, because I actually think Mishima's more interesting than Paul Schrader's Mishima, the film.
100%.
Maybe.
That's why I started talking about him loads.
Yeah, but I think it's deeply compositional, and it owes a lot to, I would say, kind of elements like new wave cinema. There's a kind of coolness to the film. It begins in a way that automatically reminded me of Contempt by Godard.
Oh, yes, that's good.
Really strong, visceral kind of reminder of Godard at the beginning. And interestingly, the film, and we'll talk a bit more about it, but it has this episodic structure which tells Mishima's life in four parts, four complementary pieces, each of which, well, in theory, each of which relates to one of his creative works, a play or a novel, and it kind of slips between those. It slips between these kind of stagings of his plays and novels and these more conventional biopic elements, which kind of document his final day as he kind of prepares himself and his cadets from the Tatenokai, the Shield Society, and he goes off to sort of effectively bring about a revolution in Japan, and a revolution, as you said, is beauty, which is kind of fascist and anti-capitalist, because it kind of uses a part 3 of the film uses one of his novels, which is about literally this, about young kendo students from a kind of military academy or whatever, planning to kill a load of capitalists, and the kind of failure of that mission, basically. And then he, in real life, kind of does a kind of tawdry version of the same thing, which is, he, in a way, like the film, less the film, Mishima the Man. Mishima was trying to resurrect an atavistic kind of vision of Japan, Japanese society, which had absolutely already come to an end by 1945 anyway. And the sort of the occupation of Japan by America and the end and the abdication of the emperor. But it kind of calls on this. He was obsessed with kind of the honor and the beauty and the selflessness of Bushido, of the way of the warrior, of the samurai as a kind of tragic heroic figure in Japanese culture. So that's kind of what it is. But as a man, like you said, is libelous to maybe say he was gay. His interest in the male at a surface reading is kind of like this fascist obsession with masculine beauty and the purity of the kind of perfect, almost asexual man. It's kind of like the commandant from Salon Kitty, right? This kind of sexless, hairless, like male beauty, and whether there's like an actual carnal lust behind that or not is kind of questionable, right?
Yeah, when it comes from a place of repression, internal repression. But I don't think that's necessarily lacking in lust. I mean, I think sometimes lust is the greatest when it comes into conflict with a kind of repressive or obstructive force. I think all love has some kind of tension with the obstruction, because we can never truly be one with another person. That's very cynical
start to 2021, but it's true.
It's not even cynical. It's just like those are the goalposts, and we may score fantastic goals within them, but that is like the human condition. It's beautiful. We make art about it. We live in it. We discuss it.
And the proximity of beauty to death, which is a subject which comes up a lot in the film Mishima's life. The death is youth.
This thing about
youthful
honor,
death is beautiful. Yeah.
I mean, England has its own like really crazy system of honor, which is kind of constantly supplanting itself with new iterations that are supposed to be like different, but like the class system, kind of hierarchies of class, which I think now for younger generations are being replaced by like identity, and like kind of the politics of experience in a certain way.
The most honourable you can be in modern British society is actually to be in a polycule. That's like our version of
polycule.
A polycule is like a polyamorous grouping, isn't it? Like a cluster. So the coolest, like the most honourable you can be is in a polycule, in Manor House.
I'm in a podycule.
You're in a polycule
with Owen, Vince, and Daniel Neofiti. Occasionally Igor.
That's true. Igor is watching from the closet. Not literally. I mean, literally, he's watching. He's spying on us through our laptop. But no, it's you're right. There is a kind of there's a definite lust to it, and I guess a lot of the film, it's quite a sexy film in a lot of ways. Like the transactional nature of sex, like a lot of Mishima's books and stuff, which is unusual considering the kind of honourable man he was, where kind of prostitutes, hookers, gangsters, like those were figures in his world. He wasn't like writing he wasn't like the romantic Schillerian kind of writing about this kind of the romantic wilds. He was interested in the metropolitan world and modern people, which is one of the weird contradictions about Mishima, that he wasn't like a monk that was living in a cell and refused to engage with the modern world. He was like deeply immersed in the modern world. It was actually in a way like an entrepreneur in his own right, for someone who was so opposed to neoliberalism and capitalism, was kind of a businessman in his own right. He was a very, very famous, prominent writer, a playwright. He was a big society figure in a lot of ways. Like he was very, at least according to his Wikipedia, he was like, the press was obsessed with him, and he kind of knew how to play his public image. He was a kind of capitalist in a way. Like he used the tools of it, right?
There's a lot of edging in Mishima. There's an amazing scene where he's it's like he's fucking some bird, and she's like got a mirror, a little pocket makeup mirror, and he's like holding it over. She's holding it over her body, so that like it looks like he has breasts. It's kind of quite kinky.
It is quite kinky, isn't it?
Yeah, it's just really juicy, and I think it's a cinema of edging. I think that's kind of what Schrader captured best in this. I did watch another Schrader film called Hardcore, which is a much more conventional film about a man whose daughter goes missing and is discovered to have got involved in the pornography industry, having no previous predilection towards being in any way.
And it's the kind of shame of that, isn't it? Ended up watching a few bits. Didn't finish it.
It's a great film, actually. It's kind of like the characterization's not that good. It's kind of like probably would be directed by a better director. Like if Scorsese took that script, I'm sure it would be like a much better film. But
he did work with Scorsese.
He did Taxi Driver. That's why I said
Taxi Driver. He wrote
Taxi Driver. I think he's a better screenwriter than a director. Although Mishima does have Mishima has a very theatrical quality, but it's so many different. It's there are so many different scenes that it also becomes cinematic, and the color, and he's obviously hired a bunch of great people on the set.
Yeah, cinematic. It's very beautiful. Like it's a very arresting film to watch in like segmentally. Like when he kind of dramatizes Mishima's books and plays, he does it in a very self-consciously kind of theatrical way, often to the point where like parts of the scenery are moved away and characters kind of, it's like movable scenery. It's kind of like a filmed play almost.
How much is that like a kind of tribute to his work in the theatre, and how much of it is just like a limit to Schrader's like cinematic imagination?
No, I don't. I actually ascribe that purely to these being plays or Mishima's, because they feel like, I feel like more work went into that than there's a scene where in part 3 where the kind of kendo students are plotting the demise of these capitalists, and then the walls, these kind of
the walls fall
screen
down.
doors are all yanked away, and the camera kind of pans up, and all these policemen come in. They have this struggle, and it's like that would have been more work than just having a room.
It's quite Jarman-esque, isn't it? Actually, from one gay to another.
They're all linked. After having watched JFK, which does position that JFK, well, pretty much, because that film posits that insanely, like Oliver Stone's JFK posits that like a kind of underground homosexual club had kind of worked with the deep state to plot JFK's death. It's insane, absolutely insane. But yeah, so I think it's more Schrader kind of paying homage to Mishima, maybe because Schrader has been more, even though he's shot a lot of films, to be honest, but he feels more writerly to me.
He does.
Than directorial. Including The Canyons. Did you see any of The Canyons?
No.
13, sorry. It's Lindsay Lohan.
He's still making films, Schrader. It's quite
impressive. He is. It's weird. The Canyons is a piece of absolute fucking garbage. Unwatchable. Like I was trying to watch some, and it was written by Bret Easton Ellis. So he's worked with these weird people. He's worked with like some real great people, and he's made some interesting films. I'm just actually scrolling down his Wikipedia now, and there's there's just so many. This year there are 2 more films that are going to come out. Card Counter and Jesuit. So one he wrote, and
he's been busy during Lockie then.
Well, yeah.
Can I read an extract?
Are you going to read an extract from one of Mishima's books? Because that's the good shit.
Yeah. So it's an image of Saint Sebastian. He has a bit of a feeling while looking at the martyrdom of Saint Sebastian. That's the image we might be familiar with of Saint Sebastian, hands tied up above him to a tree with arrows that have entered his body quite recently. That day, the instant I looked upon the picture, my entire being trembled with some pagan joy. My blood soared up, my loins swelled as though in wrath. The monstrous part of me that was on the point of bursting awaited my use of it with unprecedented ardour. upbraiding me for my ignorance, panting indignantly. My hands, completely unconsciously, began a motion they had never been taught. I felt a secret, radiant something rise swift-footed to the attack from inside me. Suddenly it burst forth, bringing with it a blinding intoxication.
Crazy.
Some time passed, and then, with miserable feelings, I looked around the desk I was facing. A maple tree at the window was casting a bright reflection over everything. Over the ink bottle, my school books and notes, the dictionary, the picture of Saint Sebastian. There were cloudy white splashes about. On the gold imprinted title of a textbook, on the shoulder of the ink bottle, on one corner of the dictionary. Some objects were dripping lazily, leadenly, and others gleamed dully, like the eyes of a dead fish. Fortunately, a reflex motion of my hands to protect the picture had saved the book from being soiled. This was my first ejaculation, if you hadn't guessed. It was also the beginning.
Less about Ralph's Instagram stories. It's interesting because it's good because he captures like the elation and the kind of shame. And I think those two things are linked with him, aren't they? Like
excitement and shame at the same time. This is why people can't understand him from our current context, because we've actually internalized shame much more heavily. To the point where we can't even really talk about someone like Mishima. That's my contemporary opinion. Yeah,
I think it's true because he was even. This is all about speculation, but he was in the Japan of 1970. The world he was trying to call back into being was one that had already passed.
Brexit.
Yeah, talk about the return.
Hard Brexit.
Hard Brexit, the hardest Brexit of all. But he was kind of, consciously calling on a period of Japanese history that had passed. The samurai who he kind of desired to embody. Had been, their power had been whittled away over the course, from very powerful state actors in the kind of 18th, 17th, well, before that, but kind of during the 18th, 19th century, their power had been massively whittled away. Samurai were banned from carrying swords in public. That was a major breaking of their status and power. So there was a lot of shame attached to, and a lot of, like, as it were, dishonor attached to their status and class. And Mishima wasn't part of that class, but he was kind of trying to revive the honor that he saw in that. And it's kind of like any atavistic thing, it's self-consciously, like, self-deceptive, right? Like,
what does atavistic mean? Sorry, you've said it 3 times.
Backwards looking, sort of almost out of date.
Okay.
Brexit is probably a good example of that sort of, but it's the kind of, consciously calling on the, all these nurses complaining about the wards, they wouldn't have survived for 1 minute in the trenches. We are good boys in the trenches. Like, it's kind of that thing where you deceive yourself of what the past is, and you resurrect an image of it. Yeah, and I think that's what it was. There was a yearning there. Like, even you said with the beautiful bit about that passage where it's like he covered even in the moment of ecstasy, he covered the image of this reproduction of this martyrdom, so he didn't despoil it. It's like that. A really good scene. I've been on your recommendation. I've been watching Succession, which is again a lot about honor and shame at a family level.
It's written by an English person, which I think is interesting.
It's interesting.
English. It feels like quite an English approach to an American situation.
Yeah, it's almost Armando Iannucci-ish. I mean, he's not English, but whatever, British.
Yeah. I mean, Armando Iannucci basically is part of English culture, I would say.
Yeah, more so than Scottish, sure. But he, the scene where Culkin, so Macaulay Culkin's brother, who's very good in it, he has that really good line where he's like, I look like a matador and everyone wants to fuck me. It's a really, really good line. But anyway, he masturbates in his office, doesn't he? He becomes a CEO of this family. He's completely useless, and then he on the top of this like phallic building, he wanks in the window, and then, which is quite an absurd scene, but then has to kind of wipe his cum off the glass. And it's a very good kind of like modern version of what Mishima is capturing, which is like the shame, entwining of shame and pleasure. And that's maybe where the pleasure comes from, actually.
Yeah, but I mean, Mishima is sort of... no, it is actually quite similar, actually. They're just worshipping different idols, aren't they?
Yeah.
I mean... it's hard to know what to say about the Mishima film. Like, I felt like it was a really appropriate response to Mishima. I mean, I've only read the book that I read from earlier, Confessions of a Mask, but it felt like a very appropriate response to his life. At the same time, it felt kind of almost a bit too, it wasn't really raw enough. Like, did you feel that it had like bites? Or was the bite mostly just coming from the fact that it was fairly faithful to Mishima's deeply bitey life?
Maybe that. I felt it felt the appropriate kind of film to make. I don't think you could make there's no right biopic of Mishima.
No, but if someone like Pasolini or Fassbinder had made it, then
I think Pasolini would have been more interesting, to be honest, or Fassbinder.
Talking
about the composed, because Pasolini was managed to be deeply composed, but you felt effective and obviously Fassbinder is all about the feels. Whereas Schrader's kind of, he kind of brings like a clinical eye to it, and it's very beautiful, right? And it really is, and the scenes with the kind of golden temple and the young, I think, so the Mishima in that sequence, in that book, the character who's kind of a stand-in for Mishima but not, has his stutter, and he has this kind of sexual interaction with this girl, and he can't bring himself to touch her breast, right? And he's kind of upbraided for that. But again, it kind of links back. But that's that particular, a lot of that part of the story takes place in this kind of bizarre, it calls it the Golden Temple, but it's like this weird room, kind of vibrant fake room with this golden temple in the middle of it. And it's not sure whether that's supposed to be a kind of abstract representation of a park or a real space.
It feels like a kind of, you've reached a new level of this game. Like, you do different levels of a video game, and they all have different, like Mario Kart, you're like in a different. I know
he got blue shelled by.
I played Mario Kart, and each time there's like a whole different. It's a similar set of boundaries, but like
this is the rainbow road of. But I think it's so it's got this kind of staginess to it, and I think that feels appropriate to Mishima's deeply complex and contradictory life. It's kind of, there's a lot of things you can call Mishima, ways to describe him. That's why I chose like playwright, poet, and model, because he did stage his own photographs. Like I said, he was very. And it's a part of the film which is very good, where you see Mishima recreate, like staging these photos, and he restages the martyrdom, quite sexily, because one of his obsessions is with physical health, because he's ashamed of being a coward, so called. So in the film, it makes more point about it. And the research I did, so he wanted nothing more than to die with honor in World War II. But he was rejected for military service because he had supposedly tuberculosis. And in the film,
he pretend he has a cough in the film?
Yeah, in the film,
he pretends to have COVID.
Yeah,
which is a very easy thing to do nowadays.
Implies that he kind of lied about his cough and the persistence of his cough, and claimed he was coughing up blood. And when I did some digging on it, it seems like that was more ambiguous in reality, right. And he might actually have been ill enough to. Not be accepted for military service, but obviously that was a source of great shame for him.
He's a bit sickly.
He's got like the fervour of the converted, isn't he, in later life? Like it almost feels like he starts this private military, and he kind of gets really into bodybuilding and physical. He doesn't seem
to really know why he's into any of the things he's into. He's just sort of a fanatical. It's crazy because his literature has this real sincerity and like wholeness to it, and then a lot of his behaviour just seems like super fucking autistic.
Yeah, autistic and kind of repressed and scared. And then, like I said earlier, his books kind of are obsessed with this kind of underworld almost at many points. And yet in his kind of actual political life and his activism and his public identity, he was very much this kind of, straight-laced, square haircut, military man. That committed, seppuku at a point when it was almost hilarious. Not hilarious, but there's a kind of tragicomedy to him doing it. And one thing the film doesn't do, the film ends as Mishima drives a blade into his stomach. And the second act of seppuku is your second chopping off your head.
So which someone else has to do because
someone else has to do. There is one case of, I was reading about, there's one case of rip your guts out, someone cuts it off your head, which I suppose there's, by this point apparently, that element it was mostly, it was normally people would cut your head off before you cut your stomach. You would reach for your blade.
How would you cut your stomach if you didn't have a head?
You wouldn't. It was it kind of over time became more humane because it was agonizingly painful. And so it was a compromise, I guess. So it was ritualized to a point where you would reach for your blade and then they would cut your head off before you did it because it was so agonizingly painful.
Awful to have your belly open.
Awful. But in reality,
I can't even imagine how it just would like. The level of pain would just be like, it's just not even.
It's ow.
I can imagine what it would be like to have like one of my fingers chopped off. But like,
oh god, much worse than that.
But like, because that's like slightly close to like having a paper cut something. But
you know, when you cut your finger when you're like chopping bread,
or your head cut off, it's like that's just a whole other world of pain. I wouldn't even
world of pain.
I mean, but you would also just die so soon, wouldn't you, as well?
Well, this is a weird thing, all right? I'll go on a side bend, but like
you're gonna tell me someone managed to cut their belly open and then had the energy and the like concentration.
Well, someone cut off. No, it happened once. There's one case where a guy, I think it was in World War II, I was reading about it, managed to totally self-seppuku. So he cut his stomach open and cut his own head off.
That's fucking lonely.
So peak. I can't even
get someone to help you out with the head. That's what she said.
She said. But no, he got the sloppiest top of all. But I like. So this, when Mishima did this, the bit it doesn't show is a head chopping off. Now, what actually happened?
Doesn't even show the belly, man. He like it cuts when the film cuts before he cuts.
But what happened was, I was reading about it. Dignity, but his second fucked it up. He whacked him in the jaw with the sword. He completely fucked it up and tried twice and missed. So someone else had to step in. Someone else stepped in and did it for him, did the head chopping off. All the while, Mishima's lying on the floor bleeding out. And then the other guy who'd missed was ashamed, so he committed seppuku. But his wounds were too shallow to die, so the guy had to... It's absolutely insane. Like everything, we laugh, but it's the comedy of it, I guess, in a way, is this tragic comedy because it's like.
Well, it's sort of unavoidable. I mean, you could have just not started a nationalist coup.
Yeah, it's amazing. It's amazing that like I said, it was so backwards looking and it's so deluded. It's not that dissimilar from this happening at various points in modern Japanese history. It's like Aum Shinriko with the tube gassings in Japan in the early 90s, which was another cult organization, a lot more kind of hippified in a way, but a cult, Aum Shinriko, which is like Shining Light or whatever, kind of having a similar project, but theirs was much more kind of terroristic, whereas I think Mishima wasn't out to kill or hurt anyone. I don't think. I think he was there to just kind of create this radical transformation in consciousness in Japan, which
he was just like people on the left. He just thought, if we do my thing, it will be better.
Yeah, everyone will kind of wake up and they just need a call to arms.
Although he was quite pro-violence, wasn't he? He was quite like...
Well, you don't start a private military if you're not, a little bit into the kink of violence.
There is a great quote from him where he says, I'm neither pro-left nor I'm neither left nor right, I'm pro-violence.
I love that.
Beautiful.
Antifa.
Yeah, exactly. It's true. It's true.
It's weird how, what did you think about do you think it was kind of, the film was kind of spoiled almost? I think just watching stagings of his books was like kind of enough almost.
I tell you what it's similar to, which I just watched last night, so that may be a reason why I'm comparing it. Vice, but about Dick Cheney by Adam McKay.
Really good film.
It has the same. I didn't like it.
Did you not? But I love him as a well,
I love The Big Short. The Big
Short, yeah.
But as a polyform portrait of a human through various different time frames and life states and kind of, but with this kind of main, the main narrative about the Iraq War and him being vice president is like, that's kind of the thing that it's always shadowing to. It's like prefiguring.
It's kind of teeing the Iraq War up, isn't it? It's kind of say the Iraq War is explicable through Dick Cheney's.
I thought Vice was too Brechtian. I thought Vice was like.
Yeah, it was a bit, wasn't it?
It was not as good as self-referential, and it didn't like. It spent way too much time on this decision he had to make about whether or not he was going to just be a rich oil baron and like hang out with his family, or whether he was going to become vice president, and whether or not that was like a good job or not, which he obviously, everyone knows he turned it into a job that was good for him, you know. So I don't know why that bit was so. And also, like, why did they should have used documentary footage more. It was so weird having like footage, like real footage of Kofi Annan like passing over to Colin Powell, and then Colin Powell being played by some other dude.
You know, Big Short is good because it captures a banal, like the kind of, it's not even like the kind of politics behind the curtain. It's literally like banal financial transactions. It kind of turns that into it's like Moneyball as well, which does, it takes something very banal and kind of not dramatic at all and turns it into something quite dramatic. Whereas the political maneuverings that led to the Iraq War is deeply dramatic by definition. So the format isn't appropriate maybe to the.
I think also, the way they kind of cut. I mean, the whole framing narrative of the organ donor, I just thought was boring and like distracting. And then the way they used archive footage, or not, they didn't use archive. They sort of reconstructed footage of torture, which just seemed kind of tasteless, really. And I'm all for morally complex humans being depicted, but I just found I just don't know why they were trying to create moral complexity with Cheney, because he is.
It doesn't need it.
He's not morally complex. Like, even the thing about how he was pro-gay because of his daughter, like, that's also selfishness. That's also having no in a way, that's having no morals, because you're
and you don't get off the hook for you don't get off the hook for being a war criminal for having a gay daughter. Yeah,
and I don't think they were trying to say that, but I think they were trying to sort of say, oh, look how differently he is towards his family, and it's like, what? Isn't that what everyone's like?
Everyone knows that. I mean, everyone knows that. Like you can
like
be
every
a
evil person,
monster at work. Yeah, the banality of evil it's Eichmann, isn't it? I mean, even though the Eichmann narrative is heavily disputed, but I think it's the case with the same conversation about Hitler. You know, how did a watercolorist and vegetarian and dog lover, well, how was he capable of killing millions of Jews? And orchestrating the Holocaust? It's kind of it's the wrong quandary to have about those people. It's the wrong. I think the main quandary to have.
The main pro of Vice is it reminds everyone that the Bush administration was much worse than the Trump administration.
Yes, it's weird how short the memory is, actually, because I think even with the big dribbling orange baby narrative about Trump, and that Trump is the stupidest president we have, and I actually think Trump is a lot smarter than Bush ever was. Like, Trump is an exceptional. I think he is. I think he's quite not exceptional, but he's a very good political operator in a lot of ways. Because he rode. He found a popular wave, considering he was a Democrat in years past. Like he rode an independent Democrat, and he rode a wave, in a public popular wave, in a very kind of brash way, but rode a popular wave into power. And I think there's a kind of a machination there, whereas Bush was just the next most appropriate scion of it's not scion, but kind of flag bearer for the Bush dynasty.
The stupid fail son dynastic inheritor who hired a fucking evil prick to be a henchman of capital, which he did extremely efficiently at the cost of hundreds of thousands of lives of people across the world.
Much more damaging. But it's weird how short the memory is, actually, because I grew up when both of us kind of matured. Well, I kind of matured around, I was 14 when 15 when the Iraq War happened. So
it was the first demonstration I ever went on. I was like,
same. And I remember him because the world was obsessed with pointing out Bush's failings, and Bush has had a renaissance. It's like he is now a watercolorist, isn't he? He paints.
It's like reverse Hitler, right?
Yeah, reverse Hitler, and it's weird how everyone kind of like, oh well, he's just and he's kind of had this recitation, and he's kind of come back into limelight, and people treat him with this.
I think people like him more than Blair. That's the weird thing.
Oh, they do. No,
not that Blair I'm a fan of Blair, but like. It's weird that Blair was at the time, it was like Blair's the lapdog and Bush is the boss, and now everyone's like, I don't know, whatever. I'm just kind of ranting, but like essentially like it's criminal that America doesn't like see that turning point, especially the 2000 election, which was like a highly disputable outcome,
more disputable than the Trump
ramifications. Because of what happened
the Florida count which was what it hinged on, I believe, right? Or was that the second election? But either way, there was a lot more kind of electoral regularity under Bush than there ever was under, obviously, like Trump. There's a comicality to Trump's regime, whereas apart from Bush, he was a bit of an oddity. His regime was a continuity from what had gone before, whereas Trump is a disruptor, right? And so was Mishima. To get back to the film.
Hey, glad I didn't have to do that.
But he was a disruptor, and the film's fine. I mean, like I said, it's beautiful. There's beauty, have a cumulative power. Yeah, it's kind of moving. I'm more interested about Mishima, the man, than I am about Mishima as he appears in this film.
Yeah.
All
right. Well, that was a nice episode. As listeners will be able to tell, we have really thrown off the yoke of Mubi as a kind of criterion.
Oh, nice!
If you'll pardon the reference to something else, as a criterion for selection in our podcast, we now review all kinds of stuff, and we will continue to do so because Mubi is a bit boring after a while. If you do 30 episodes or so, you start to get a bit bored of masturbating to Juliette Binoche.
Every day I'm doing that, and I feel and then the kind of the light from the maple tree reflects on the globs. The globs. But I don't. We decided.
Is that what the Mubi logo is? Those little dots.
Globs of cum. Yeah.
Globs of cum from people who've been masturbating to Juliette Binoche's
Monica Vitti in our I believe it's Monica Vitti in our logo.
It is Monica Vitti. Yeah, Monica Vitti.
So Monica Vitti. So there we go. But yeah, we've thrown off the yoke and we are going a bit wider, which means we're also more open to recommendations, suggestions from the kind of further field of film stuff. So
I was recommended to review by someone who never listens to the pod, someone who actually actively bullies me for having a podcast. I was asked to review Soul by Disney Pixar.
Really?
Yeah.
Fuck off.
But then I realised, he was kind of trolling me because he knows that I'm a bit of an art house snob.
Yeah.
But I do actually want to. I would be quite curious to do like a Pixar episode.
Yeah, why not?
I mean, Inside Out. I haven't seen Ratatouille.
Oh, Ratatouille is a stone cold classic, but Inside Out, which I watched, is obviously like an AI generated film that kind of speaks to the wokeification of children's entertainment. Because I grew up on Watership Down,
All right, Toby Young.
I grew up when kids were kids, and it was dog eat dog out there. But no, I don't know. It's very woke in possibly the worst way, which is like if you're depressed, you're a superhero. The real superheroes have borderline personality disorder. It's a bit lame, but that's what it is. But Soul, I'm open to Soul.
Cool, maybe do Soul then. I don't know how to watch it though. It's like a torrent. Unless one of us has got a subscription to Disney.
No, I know someone who has though. I know a guy. Okay. That was Mishima. Any closing thoughts on Mishima?
No, man, I closed it off already.
You have?
It's a good
I'm
film.
just thinking.
But no, it's fine. It's an okay film. But read Confessions of a Mask, which is like an amazing novel, and also Be Morally Complex.
Be Morally Complex. Form a private army. Initiate a revolution of beauty. Kidnap a military leader.
It all comes back around. I mean, that's the neoliberal dream, isn't it? Really. Follow your vision.
Disrupt. Innovate, succeed.
On that note, thank you for listening, listeners.
Peace out. Happy 2021 as well.
Next week for more 2021 goodness. Bye.
Peace out.